Hello and welcome. Welcome to Everything is Energy, and welcome to a continuation of an episode that I offered. Gosh, it was about a week ago. It was about an event that began on July 21st, and that was Eris stationing retrograde. I am recording today, just a couple days after that station, to talk about something that's happening. Just a couple days from now on July 26th. But to kind of, and that's Saturn stationing retrograde. And so, you know, let's remember that Eris is perhaps one of the more misunderstood celestial bodies in modern astrology. And, she has this huge orbit, 558 years. And, you know, the way I've come to understand her is not simply as is popularly known, the goddess of discord, but as the revealer. You know, she reveals where ego has potentially become over leveraged, or if something along those lines has drifted out of alignment. Those places where something that may have been hidden is ready to come to light. And as I reflected on this throughout this week, something else became, increasingly apparent to me. Because what I'm talking about now in this podcast, and they really are, I feel like, con cohering into a similar event, because Saturn is stationing retrograde literally 4 days after Eris stationed retrograde. And, so this isn't within days, this is also in the very same sign. They're both in the sign of Aries. And to me, this doesn't feel like two unrelated astrological events. It feels like a conversation. It feels like a cohesion and something that's happening potentially as a continuous story. And so, if you think about it, whenever we study the heavens, we don't really look at planets in isolation because, at least in my understanding and experience, nature rarely works that way. Forests don't function because of one tree, and a river isn't shaped by a single drop of water, right? If we're thinking about an ecosystem that's interconnected, then there's this understanding of relationship. And I believe the sky invites us into this very same way of thinking and understanding, because each celestial body and energetic signature is contributing something unique, and they're creating this kind of tapestry or conversation. So this week, I believe that Saturn and Eris are really speaking to one another. And, I've already posted the podcast for Eris about a week ago, so go ahead and feel free to go back and check that out. But let's remember that, Eris is asking about what's potentially quietly fallen out of alignment, and where has, as I mentioned, ego maybe become over leveraged. And if that's the themes that Eris asks, Saturn is asking, well, then what are we going to build? If Eris is revealing, Saturn is about reorganization and responsibility. And, what Eris uncovers, Saturn is there to begin to structureize, because Saturn is the planet of karma, as I like to think. And karma, people often think of Saturn as a restrictive energetic, and it can be, but it's really because it wants to help us create structures and things in our world that are sustainable. And when I think of Saturn and Eris, both in the sign of Aries, both stationing retrograde within 4 days of each other, I don't think of them as competing archetypes. I've already mentioned I see them more as in a dance or in a partnership. And, one of them, Eris, is revealing the work to be done, and the other, Saturn, is really going to teach us how to do the work. And, Saturn has always been among my favorite planets, and that may surprise you. But I mentioned it doesn't always have the best reputation, or it's interesting when we think about the archetypes in astrology. Saturn is the disciplinarian, the restrictor, the taskmaster, and often the one who constricts us or maybe tells us no. But I don't. I don't see it that way. If you think about everything always being in a continual unfolding process and that we're never done, right? Even if something isn't quite going the way that we think, when we can step back and take a look at the larger picture, there's generally, usually always a bigger picture and a higher reason for what's happening. So, I mentioned earlier the idea of sustainability. Saturn really wants us to create things, whether it's a relationship, a business, a way of living, or just a belief that's sustainable, that can support us. But also, you know, that can mean that we're not just going to coast through, we're not just going to skate through all the time. I mentioned earlier, and I like to think of Saturn as a planet of karma. And even the word karma itself can be misunderstood because, karma can bring to mind for some this notion of like immediate punishment. But I think of karma as more like cause and effect and yin and yang, and just the fact that everything ultimately is energy, right? So then, Saturn, if it is a planet of karma, Saturn isn't creating the karma, Saturn is making it visible. And Saturn really is inviting us to take responsibility for who we are and what we have built, excuse me, and what we're intending to create. And I think at this juncture on our planet, Saturn is really kind of gently nudging us to strengthen the things that can carry us into the future. And there's another phrase that I often hear and I speak of among astrologers, and that is that the outer planets always win. And I've always loved that expression, not because as astrology is deterministic per se, but actually quite the opposite. It reminds us that the great celestial cycles are working with subtle energy. They're not always forcing us. They're most often inviting us quietly and patiently and imperceptibly. And yet, if over the years and decades we're not listening, then yeah, there might be a sense of something being forced to happen. But I think about it as this wonderful, subtle, energetic communication that is absolutely not harsh, and it's just kind of nudging us to wake up and realize that maybe even right now, things that maybe have felt permanent are changing. And while Saturn isn't an outer planet, Saturn is an interpersonal planet along with Jupiter. As an interpersonal planet, Saturn and Jupiter are the bridge between the outer planets and the inner planets, right? And so Saturn is reminding us that what truly matters in life doesn't need to be made in a hurry. That things like trust and wisdom develop over time. And if we get back to the metaphor that nature offers us, you know, forests grow over hundreds and hundreds of years. Healthy soil, you can't just snap your fingers and create it. It takes time. And, I think that might be Saturn's first lesson is it's not simply for us to work harder, but to build patiently and with intention and integrity and with wisdom. And to become someone whose life can support what our soul is asking us to create. So as we explore Saturn in this podcast, I invite you to hold a simple question. And that question is, what in my life is ready to become more enduring? Let me say that again. What in my life is ready to become more enduring? And so that's an interesting question because the question isn't what's ready to be bigger or faster or more impressive. It's a much more simple and profound question, more enduring. Because I believe that the invitation Saturn is extending to all of us during this remarkable retrograde is about that. So let's kind of shift into just shifting our focus to Saturn itself and kind of seeing if we can come to understand its energetic a little bit more deeply today. Because, in my understanding, far before Saturn was a planet in astrology, it was a story. And one of the things I love about mythology is that it preserves mental, psychological, emotional truths in a symbolic form. And whenever we approach Greek and Roman mythology and many other forms of mythology, these stories of history, these poems, these archetypes, they continue revealing something essential about the human experience. And I think Saturn is no exception because in Roman mythology, Saturn was the god of agriculture. Saturn was the god of harvest, and Saturn was known as Kronos, right? The god of time. And that's in Greek that he was known as Kronos. But as we know, Greek and Roman mythology overlap quite a bit. So, over the centuries, Saturn then became or has become associated with these notions of discipline and responsibility and structure and the passage of time itself. And, I feel like in some sense, Saturn has been portrayed as stern and demanding and maybe even a little bit frightening, but I love looking at these myths and really sitting with them and taking the opportunity to re-examine because I wonder if also the myth of Saturn is a little bit misunderstood. Because as you guys probably know, I spend a lot of my time here working with the land on a farm, and I think about Saturn through the eyes of a farmer or someone who works with plants and agriculture because no amount of wishing is going to ripen the fruit or make it bloom or even impatience isn't going to persuade anything to grow, right? And if we think about our understanding of nature, the earth and the sun and the cosmos, everything has its own rhythm and its own timing. And if we're continuing with the metaphor of the farmer, the farmer who works with the rhythms is one who goes with those flows. If you're working against those rhythms, it can be very exhausting. And so there's this sense of this ease and abundance when we work with the flows of the universe. And I think that metaphor extends far beyond agriculture and into everything that we do. If we're thinking about astrology as presenting these themes of flows of energies of what's coming down to our planet from the cosmos at this moment in time. And as I mentioned, I really don't necessarily feel like Saturn is interested in punishment. I think he's interested in reality. And I think he's really interested in helping us, as I mentioned, create things that are sustainable and real in this world. And that can absolutely feel limiting to take something from our imagination and to really try to put the put the ribs in the walls around it. Because, we have to we're bound by time and resources and energy. And yet those limitations are what makes creation in this physical world possible. So I don't think of structure as the opposite of creativity. I think it's something that allows creativity to endure. And this is why I often think of that Saturn as kind of more like a great architect. He's asking, can what we're building actually support the life that we hope to live? Will those foundations be standing 20 or 30 or 50 years from now? And if the answer is no, Saturn isn't shaming us. Saturn is inviting us back to the drawing board. Saturn is inviting us to keep those intentions and keep those impulses, but to be able to turn them into something that can be sustained. And, I've come to see Saturn as one of astrology's actually great expressions of compassion. And by compassion, I'm not saying sentimental compassion. I'm talking about enduring compassion, the kind that cares enough to say, I care about you so much that I don't want you to continue building on unstable ground. And if you think about what that means, it's a friend who tells the truth because they care about you so much that they know that in 5 years, if they don't speak that truth, that that you would have wanted to know that. And that's a very different kind of communication, right? It's a very different kind of friendship. I'm not saying harsh communication for harsh communication's sake, but I think we've all been at some kind of a juncture where it's almost easier to to walk away. And it may be a little bit harder to be with a person who is our companion or our friend and stay with them and be compassionate with them, but also be willing to help them be with what is so that they can and we can create the future. And, I think one of the beautiful paradoxes of Saturn is that, again, he appears to limit us, but only so that something greater can actually become possible. Because he's removing the distractions, he's clarifying the priorities, he's strengthening or pointing out those places that are weak so that they can be strengthened. And it's absolutely not because we should be smaller or life should be smaller. It's because it becomes more sustainable and authentic when it's built on solid ground. And just to get back to another metaphor for the natural world with Saturn, I think about, stepping out into the orchards here and really having to learn how to prune trees. And when I first had to learn how to prune trees, yeah, it did feel a little bit harsh to cut off some of its branches. But, you come to learn that certain branches will be able to sustain more fruit and hold more strength and hold their own strength over time. So there's this sense of, that I think experience orchardists know, and I'm not saying I'm that, I'm saying I learned from one. But pruning is never punishment, it's about the future. And Saturn, I feel like, kind of understands that, right? If something kind of feels like a limitation, it's actually a preparation. It's a preparation for future growth. It's a preparation for a solid foundation. And I think this is one of the reasons why Saturn may have been misunderstood for so long, because he's not trying to make us or our lives smaller. He's trying to make us and our lives stronger. And that's a profound difference, right? He's asking us to build lives that are capable of carrying the future we hope to inhabit. Not just emotionally, not just spiritually, absolutely emotionally and absolutely spiritually. But Saturn is about the 3D world. So there's this practicality that he's bringing, right? And, collectively, I believe that these two archetypes of Saturn and Eris are really inviting humanity to entertain some remarkable questions. Not, we are the microcosm to the macrocosm, but can we build a world that reflects the consciousness that we say that we value? Can we put our energetic money where our mouth is? Can our structures embody the wisdom that we're understanding is true? Can our technologies remain connected to our humanity? Can our courage mature through interconnectedness and stewardship and reciprocity? Those are all huge questions for us right now. And I think if we think about what's happening, we're absolutely being initiated right now, and we're being invited to be the thing that we want to see and to, Gandhi, be the change. That sounds, that's such a simple quote, but there's a reason why he said it. So I guess if I were to summarize this conversation, kind of unfolding in the heavens right now, I might say it this way, that Eris is really lovingly revealing where life has drifted out of alignment. And I say lovingly because even though some people call her the street fighter, I think of her as something different, shining the spotlight on things that need to be seen. And I think of all planets, even things that seem challenging in a benevolent light. And Saturn is patiently teaching us how to restore the architectural structural integrity together. So they're reminding us that transformation isn't simply about seeing differently, it's about living differently, building differently, becoming differently, being differently. And I guess that's kind of why I named this podcast The Great Reorganization Part Two, because I feel like that's potentially what we've been being invited to all along. And I think maybe right now is the time where it's being revealed to us that we're ready to really start to own that portion of our creation. So as I was reflecting on this notion of Saturn, all these themes around Saturn and this upcoming retrograde in just a couple days, I couldn't help but once again think about Eris because just a couple days earlier she stationed retrograde. And if she's quietly revealing where our inner and outer worlds may have drifted out of alignment, Saturn is arriving with tools in his hands. So this is a really cool metaphor because he's not arriving to criticize, he's not arriving to condemn. He's arriving to rebuild and reinforce and create structures that are worthy of the future that is trying to emerge. And I can't help but think that maybe that's why these two archetypes are stationing retrograde literally within days of one another in the same sign, this very personal sign of Aries. It's as if the heavens are reminding us that awareness alone is not enough. And that would be the Eris portion, right? But, once something is revealed, then the real work begins. Then building what endures is the next step. And so I really feel like that is potentially exactly why Saturn is stationing retrograde immediately after Eris. And before we kind of shift into the energetic of Aries, I want to spend a couple moments just kind of appreciating Saturn as this member of our solar system from an astronomical perspective, because I find that if we can link astronomy with astrology, there's this wisdom piece, there's this whole picture that comes online because, astronomy continually reminds me that astrology begins with observation. And for thousands of years, human beings have looked up. And, if we think about how Saturn has been one of the clearest expressions of the planets moving in order, because Saturn requires approximately 30 years, it's actually 29 and a half Earth years, to complete one orbit around the sun. And if we think about that as in kind of not opposition, but if we think about how that might be perceived by our ancestors and by us now, that every 30 years Saturn completes its orbit. Compare that to Eris, 500 and almost 60 years. Compare that to Pluto, well, more like 250 years. Those cycles are beyond the current human life cycle. So Saturn having a 30-year orbit means that people can experience potentially one, two, or even three of Saturn's orbits. And, it's also Saturn spends roughly 2.5 years moving through each zodiac sign. And so Saturn has kind of a different rhythm. He's still one of the slower visible planets. Slow enough to reshape the chapters of our life, yet close enough that we experience several Saturn cycles during a lifetime. And and if we think about what the idea of a Saturn return means in astrology, there's this notion of a profound season of maturation with every Saturnian cycle. So let's also note that, every year Saturn stations retrograde. And Saturn stations retrograde for approximately 4.5 months. So this year's retrograde begins on July 26th, 2026. And it's stationing retrograde at approximately 14 degrees Aries. And a station is an apparent pause before beginning to take a gradual backward journey to the naked eye in the night sky. So Saturn's going to remain retrograde for 137 days this year. And it's only going to turn direct at the very end of 2026 on December 10th. And, one detail I find quite meaningful here this year is that Saturn's going to remain entirely within Aries through this retrograde. He's not going back into Pisces, he's staying in Aries. And this may seem kind of like a small astronomical detail, but I think symbolically it means something to us because there are times in astrology when a retrograde returns us to an old chapter, like back into a previous sign, back into previous lessons, back into unfinished stories. Because retrogrades are often revise, review, reconsider, right? But I think it's if we think about what it means to have Saturn retrograding, but staying in the sign of Aries, this means this is a potentially different time. He's not asking us to go, he's not going back into Pisces and inviting us to revisit the dream. He's asking us to instead, he's staying in Aries and he's asking us to strengthen the beginning, to remain present with the work already unfolding. And it's as though the heavens with Saturn are kind of just saying, stay here, stay present. And also, there is absolutely still more to build in this moment. And, I've often noticed that Saturn refuses to rush. And in our modern culture, where speed is quite often mistaken for progress, Saturn measures progress differently. Saturn's asking, will this still matter 10 years from now? Will this still matter 20 years from now? Will this foundation support what you're trying to become? Can this structure bear weight? And so it's reminding us that this strength and this permanence and also this new world that we're building is developing patiently. Great megalithic structures or even ancient cathedrals, they're not built in a week. They're built over long periods of time. And if we think about that's the same thing of these things that we value in our world, trust and character and wisdom, these things that are associated with Saturn as well, right? So I guess this is again just one of the reasons why I've always appreciated Saturn, because it reminds us that life unfolds according to a more natural, nuanced timing. So as we move kind of into the symbolism of Saturn and Aries, I just kind of want to put a pin in this notion that Saturn isn't slowing us down. Potentially instead, he's helping us build something worthy of the future that we're creating. Because if we think about one of the things that might be happening in our world right now, as we're moving through times of tremendous transformation, there is this very human tendency to try to find the solution ASAP, as soon as possible, right? And Saturn, I think, is inviting us to be here now and to be in the process and to trust it and to absolutely be about being a part of the resolution, a part of the future, co-creating the future. But we're not doing so from a space of fear or rush or needing to figure it out ASAP. There's this kind of invitation to take a nice deep breath. And so now I kind of want to shift because both Eris and Saturn are in the sign of Aries. Aries is cardinal masculine fire ruled by Mars. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. And so, as the first sign of the zodiac, it represents emergence and initiation and the courage to begin. Every spring we witness Aries in nature. The seeds are breaking open, the shoots are emerging through the soil. Life is pushing up to the light. And so, there's this tremendous vitality in Aries. Yet, if we're at the very beginning, that also requires some direction, because if all we're doing is being enthusiastic and taking all sort of actions, that's not going to build a meaningful life, because without discipline, we can dissipate. So this is why I find Saturn's journey into Aries just kind of perfect for right now. Saturn isn't extinguishing Aries, it's maturing it. Because if Aries has its shadow tendency, right, it's warmongering and bullying and this kind of fiery impulsivity, uh, egocentric action. And I think it's interesting that Eris is cutting through the ego, and Saturn is saying, yes, absolutely take action. But, how, when we're taking action, how can we make that courage become consistent? How can we make the vision become something tangible? How can our own assertion of who we are and our independence also become an assertion of our responsibility for ourselves and our world? So, those feel like very Saturnian questions. And, if Saturn is karma and karma isn't punishment, but it's the natural unfolding of cause and effect, then that means that every action, every decision is gradually shaping the life that we're inhabiting. And so Saturn is really just simply asking us to become conscious. If one of the things that's happening is humans are having the opportunity to upgrade their consciousness, to upgrade our ability to see and feel and understand energy. then this is about understanding that those small choices that we're making today can become the foundations for tomorrow. And that's kind of why I like to describe Saturn as helping us build within this physical world. And if we're building within the physical world, that would be the 3D world. But we could also say that Saturn is maybe even helping us understand the fourth dimension, because fourth dimension introduces time and duration and continuation and sustainability. And so it's not just can I touch it? It's it's adding this dimension of time. Can this continue? Can this way of life, can the thing that we're nourishing continue? And so if it can't, then Saturn's going to invite recalibration. If it can, Saturn's going to get the tools out of the tool belt and encourage us to build the bones, the solid structures. And to me, this makes Saturn one of astrology's great protectors because he's not removing obstacles just for its own sake. Saturn understands that obstacles can actually strengthen us. So if there is a limit that we encounter, it's maybe potentially for our own good. And if we think about if you're a parent, you might understand this, or if you're a teacher or a gardener, you might understand that pruning a tree back isn't cruelty, right? Setting boundaries and limitations are healthy for especially little ones to understand what is and isn't possible, right? So I guess, I think this is where Saturn and Aries is really kind of neat. Saturn's asking what kind of person are we becoming? What kind of world are we building? Saturn isn't asking what we're accumulating. Saturn isn't asking what we're achieving. It's asking who are we becoming through the choices we make every day? What are we creating through the choices we make every day? And even though I'm doing this podcast in July 2026, this feels to me like a lifelong question. And this feels to me like a question worth revisiting, which is why Saturn returns are such really neat astrological events. So, I want to switch now to Saturn's conversation with Eris, because I think that this is where, um, Eris is kind of gently revealing what has fallen out of alignment, right? Where ego has become a little bit overblown. And Saturn, so if Eris is pointing out what's out of alignment, Saturn is arriving carrying the tools, as I was saying. But when it's arriving, again, it's not to judge and it's not to shame. It's just to get to work, to repair, to reinforce, to rebuild. And if Eris is revealing the crack, then Saturn is teaching us how to restore the foundation. So so let's get to now the moment that kind of inspired today's podcast, because a couple of days from now on July 26th, I mentioned that Saturn's going to station retrograde at 14 degrees Aries, that's going to last through the end of the year until December 10th. And this is going to be entirely in the sign of Aries. And one of the things I love about retrogrades is they invite us to reconsider the things that we think we already understand. And this is kind of peculiar for a culture that often celebrates constant forward movement. If we're almost taught to just go and go and go and go, produce, accomplish, begin something new. And if we get back to the metaphor of nature or the cosmos, the stars are never in a hurry, nature is never hurried. The trees grow, the forests grow at their own pace, the tides move at their own pace, and it's got nothing to do with this seemingly bottomless pit of hunger, right? That I think that's part of, if we think about some of the themes that we're healing as we move through this collective transformation, we've kind of just been taught from, at least, it's in the collective, even if we didn't necessarily hear it ourselves. I think we can understand that there is this value for productivity and achievement and more, and this notion of pausing and stopping and doing less, and God forbid, moving with cycles of time versus forcing our will onto nature. There's a profound lesson for us right now if we're really seeking to create and co-create a world that is worth living in. And I think that's why it's really wonderful that Eris might have already started to present herself, and Saturn is right on her heels. So as Saturn begins this retrograde, perhaps, it might be a nice time for us to ask ourselves a couple just gentle questions. And the first is what in my life has reached a point where strengthening is more important than expanding? What in my life has reached a point where strengthening is more important than expanding? Let that land. We don't have to, we'll have a time for a meditation here in a little bit, but where am I being invited to choose integrity over immediacy? And also potentially, what foundations am I building today that I hope will support me in 10 or 20 or 30 years? And those to me feel like profoundly Saturnian questions. And yet, as I mentioned, there's another reason why this retrograde is so meaningful. Saturn is retrograde once a year. And to me, this year is very special because of all the outer planetary activity, but also because of Eris being an outer planet, and she's got this very rare retrograde, and Saturn's hooking up with it. So, Saturn's in Aries with Eris. And, this is what I believe is potentially one of the more remarkable conversation unfolding in the heavens right now, because if they're both stationing retrograde in Aries within the span of a few days, I don't believe that one causes the other. And I don't think that astrology requires that literal kind of thinking, but I think if we think of it symbolically, this is just a really extraordinary pairing because each archetype is contributing something that the other can't. Last week, we were talking about Eris as the revealer of things uh, of ego that may have been out of balance. She's not the creator of conflict. She's not necessarily the disruptor for disruption's sake. She's the revealer of where imbalance already exists, where ego has become, as I mentioned, over leveraged, where our attachment to our identity and our certainty and our recognition and really our sense of control has drifted beyond a healthy balance. So Eris shines a light on that type of stuff. She's uncovering it. She's making the things that have been previously maybe unconscious more visible. And so then just a couple days later, Saturn is entering this conversation carrying entirely different tools. If Eris has a spotlight, Saturn doesn't have a spotlight. Saturn more like has a blueprint. And, he's asking, okay, so you've had a revelation, you've seen something, what are you going to build? And to me, it's a pretty extraordinary gift to have both of these two archetypes stationing retrograde, inviting us to slow down, number one, right? We're in a time of review and revise and reorganize. And the themes are about the structures that we build in our world and the ways that we are being invited to get over leveraged ego out of the equation. So, you know, Eris is uncovering and revealing, Saturn is reorganizing and rebuilding. And again, I kind of want to loop in a quote from Carl Jung. You know, when I talked about Eris retrograde, I mentioned the quote from Carl Jung that says, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And so, I said that because to me, Eris helps make the unconscious conscious. But then Saturn is asking a different question. Saturn's saying, what are you going to do now that you can see this? And to me, that's something more like individuation. It's not simply becoming aware, it's consciously participating in our evolution. It's consciously participating in co-creating a bright new future. And so I just think there's another layer here to this story because throughout 2026 and into much of 2027, Eris is remaining in close relationship with Chiron. And Chiron's reminding us that the healing is also continuing to unfold. And if Saturn's also entering this landscape right now, not as another healer, but as the builder, then, maybe healing is revealing the wounded things that need our care. But Saturn is building a life that is no longer requiring the old wound to remain in charge. And that to me feels profoundly compassionate because if we think about what wounds do if they're unattended, there's anything that's ever been swept under the rug is never gone, right? So Chiron's that energy that's inviting us to tend to ourselves, to tend to those sensitive spaces and to do the healing work. And, Eris is also revealing other aspects, but Saturn is there to kind of really remind us of the strength, and Saturn and Aries remind us who we are. And again, I just feel like this is a very compassionate, energetic, a compassionate offering, especially from Saturn. All right, so before we get to the meditation for today, I just want to share something I'm especially excited about. As we enter eclipse season is coming up in August. I'm thrilled to be offering Rituals of the Eclipse. It's going to be a free two-part herbal gathering. We're going to be working with Rose, and we're going to be exploring the astrology of the eclipses while creating our own ritual incense. We're also going to be exploring the astrology of the eclipse and how it might impact us individually. If you have any interest in learning about your own birth chart or learning about herbalism and specifically making of natural incense, just make sure you're on my email list because that's how I'm going to be sharing everything in the weeks ahead. All right, so let's go ahead and find a comfortable place where you won't be disturbed for the next little bit of time. A place where you can close your eyes and start to draw your attention to your breath. Take a slow inhale, breathe in through your nose. Feel that breath. Feel the air in your nostrils. Feel it travel down the back of your throat. Feel the rise of your rib cage. And as you exhale, release that breath through the mouth. And again, stay connected. Feel the chest fall. Feel the air leave through your mouth. Breathing in again, just allow your awareness to come into this moment, into your body, to be with your breath. Experience your inhale. Take a little bit more time. And as you breathe out, let go and stay present. Stay with the experience of the exhale. One more time, breathing in and breathing out. And just begin to allow your awareness to settle as much as you're calling it into this moment. Just quietly affirm there's nothing you need to accomplish in this moment. There's nothing you need to repair all at once. Just simply allow yourself to arrive here and now. Notice the surface beneath your body, maybe where your sit bones connect to the chair or your back is supported by the back of the chair. Feel how, whatever position you're in, that your body is supported. And experience yourself being supported and held. Take another breath in through your nose, coming into this moment, experiencing your breath. And as you exhale, imagine releasing any pressure that might be present that tells us to move quickly or decide quickly or know quickly. Just let the rush go. And for these next few moments in time, just allow yourself to move at the pace of the earth. And go ahead and imagine that you're standing right now at the entrance of an old orchard. It's late in the season. In the northern hemisphere, it's fall. I guess in both hemispheres, it's fall. Fall is coming here soon, but just notice that the light is gentle and the air is cool and clear. And before you stretches a pathway between rows of trees. Some are young, some are mature, some have been shaped by many seasons of wind and rain and heat and cold, and they're each their own unique embodiment of themselves. And you begin walking slowly along this path. Maybe even imagine that you're barefoot and you can feel your feet connect to the soft soil beneath your feet. And really know that there is no need to hurry, that you're here to observe, to listen, and to receive what the orchard has to share with you. And as you walk with your bare feet, you become aware that you're carrying a pair of pruning shears. They're not heavy, they're just simply maybe about 7 inches long. They're just a tool for discernment and care. And it's a tool that's helping to direct life toward what can flourish. And you approach the first tree and just notice its trunk, its branches, the shape that it has created over time. And as you look at this tree, you can see that some branches are strong. Some are reaching toward the light. Others may be crossing one another. Some may be damaged. You do not need to judge the tree. You just simply need to observe it and notice what it is sharing with you. And as you stand in front of this tree, consider your own life for a moment. What has become strong? What has grown through your tending and your patience? And also, what deserves your gratitude? And just allow one foundation in your life to come to mind. Maybe it's a relationship or a personal practice, a body of work, or a commitment. Just simply pause for a few rounds of breath and acknowledge what you have already built. And now bring your awareness once again back to this tree that you're standing in front of and notice whether there's one branch that no longer supports the health of the tree. Maybe it represents a habit or an obligation or a belief, or maybe even just simply an expectation. Or maybe just a way of using your energy that is no longer sustainable. You do not need to force the answer, just simply notice what appears. And when you feel ready, imagine lifting the pruning shears and just making one mindful, careful cut. Only one. And let there be care instead of anger in the gesture. Imagine as you're trimming this branch, your hands are full of golden light. And feel within you this wisdom and recognition that life sometimes asks us to release one form so that energy can move toward another. And go ahead and watch the branch just gently fall to the earth. It is not wasted. In time, it will return to the soil. And just receive that what has been released right now is going to become nourishment for what comes next. And now take a slow breath in through your nose and release through your mouth. And feel the space that has been created. Look at the space that has been created by this branch being removed. More light can now enter. More air can move through the branches. And see if you can really come to understand that the tree has not become less alive. It's become more able to direct its life force toward what can endure. And go ahead and continue walking through the orchard. And you notice compost resting near the base of another tree. This dark earth. Remnants of earlier seasons slowly transforming into nourishment. And instinctively you kneel beside this tree and you place your hands, your fingertips on the soil. And as you do so, consider what in your life needs nourishment rather than correction. Where might you have been demanding growth for yourself without offering enough support? Perhaps your body needs rest, or a relationship needs attention, or maybe just a dream needs more time. Maybe also a commitment needs a simpler structure. Whatever comes to mind, let it be. Where have you been demanding growth without offering enough support? And as you're considering this question, imagine that you're placing rich compost at the base of this tree. You're dressing with compost. You just feel that you don't need to pull on the branches to make them grow. You know that you can nourish what cannot yet be seen, that this compost will cause immense growth in the future. And as you're kneeling at the base of this tree, consider that Saturn often works this way, quietly, below the surface, strengthening the roots before asking the branches to carry more weight. And just see if you can connect to your heart center and really begin to allow yourself to trust the unseen work. And to understand that not everything meaningful produces immediate evidence. Consider that a root can be growing even when the tree appears still. And a foundation, same thing, can be strengthening even when the outer form has yet to change or manifest. And now continue toward the oldest tree in the orchard. It stands at the far edge of the land. It's a great oak. And as you approach, you notice that its trunk is so super wide. Its bark carries the markings of many years. And you can sense as you take it in that its roots travel deep down and wide, far beneath the earth. And then look up and connect with its branches and notice how its branches extend in every direction, creating a beautiful canopy overhead. And as you stand before this oak, maybe you place your palm on its bark, maybe you just stand there, but really connect with it. Feel its presence. Feel its patience, its quiet authority. And the oak does not need to announce its strength. Its life has become the evidence. And if you haven't already placed your hand on the trunk, go ahead and do so now. And as you place your hand touching the bark, feel the roughness, the age, and the wisdom beneath your palm. Imagine that you're sensing the wisdom that has been accumulated over hundreds of years. Now imagine just energetically beginning to sense the flow of energy, maybe in the form of water, but maybe in the form of just nourishment through the tree, from the roots, through the trunk, into the branches, and toward every leaf. And just really energetically sense that this tree is both deeply rooted and continually alive. It is structured, but it is never stagnant. And it is massive and strong, but it's never separate from the life around it. And now imagine that you've become one, you've merged with this oak tree. So you're no longer standing in front of the oak, you are the oak. Your feet and legs becoming roots. And sense that those roots descend down deeply and patiently into the earth through layers of soil. Feel how those roots maybe move past stone, past old roots, toward the water and toward the nourishment, toward the quiet intelligence beneath the visible world. Now feel your spine become the trunk, steady and upright, capable of carrying weight and flowing energy. And imagine that your shoulders and your arms are becoming the branches. They're reaching outward without losing their connection to the center. And really feel how, with this embodiment of this oak, you know that you do not need to choose between being rooted and expansion. That it is the roots that actually make the expansion possible. And as you are experiencing what it's like to be this oak, feel the wind move through your branches. And feel how you're strong enough to remain, but you're also flexible enough to move. And now go ahead and bring one thing that you are building. Not something you feel pressure to accomplish, but something feels worthy of your, maybe it's a healing journey or a community or a creative offering. Maybe it's a relationship or a vocation or a home or a way of living. Whatever it is that you are building, see it as a small point of light within the center of the tree. And as a small point of light, connect with the notion that you do not have to know its complete form. You only need to recognize its essence. And ask yourself inwardly, what foundation does this require? What practice will support it? And maybe even what must I patiently learn? And simply allow any answer to arise without forcing it. And now imagine this light, this signature of what you are building that's slowly moving and expanding down through your trunk. So it remains where you placed it, but now it's beginning to head down, down into your roots. So this vision is now becoming grounded, not hurried, not imposed, but grounded. And as the light is spreading into the roots, it's understanding practice and time. And it's becoming something that you can live. With patience. I honor the wisdom of time. I honor the wisdom of time. And I strengthen what supports life. I strengthen what supports life. And go ahead and just rest here for a few moments, rooted within the earth and open to the sky. Just let yourself become aware that you are both an individual life and a part of a much larger living landscape. And when you are ready, begin returning your awareness to your physical body. Feel the surface beneath you. Maybe wiggle your fingers or your toes. And go ahead and bring one hand to your heart and take a slow breath in. And as you release through your mouth, release any belief that everything must be completed now. And as you open your eyes, see if you can set the intention to carry with you that the work of building a meaningful life is allowed to unfold over time. That you're allowed to learn and revise, to begin again with greater wisdom. Thank you for sharing this time with me. Thank you for being a part of this global community, this web of light. May Saturn's retrograde help you recognize what's worthy of your commitment. And may Eris help you see clearly wherever greater alignment is needed. And may you continue building a life that is strong enough and spacious enough and honest enough to carry what is ready to emerge. I'm grateful for you. Bright blessings and so much love.